came to Annecy thinking it was just a cute lake town for a quick walk and a few photos, but I was completely wrong. After 3 days of swimming, hiking, scenic drives, and exploring little villages, I realized Annecy has way more to offer than I expected. So, in this video, I'll show you how to spend 3 days here the right way, including the places worth your time, what I'd skip, and tips I wish I knew before coming. Let's get into Annecy. Day 1. Annecy Old Town and Lake. Morning. Lake Annecy. If there's one place that immediately sells you on Annecy, it's the lake. I came here first thing in the morning before getting into the old town, and that ended up setting the mood for the whole trip in the best way. I started walking from Le Paquier toward the Jardin de l'Europe, following the path along the water. Even though Annecy is a pretty popular destination now, the lakefront still feels surprisingly relaxed early in the day. People out there jogging, cycling, walking dogs, grabbing coffee, and it felt more like everyday life than a sightseeing spot. You also passed the Love Bridge on the way, which could have easily been one of those places you look at for 10 seconds and move on from, but the setting actually makes it worth slowing down for a minute. Between the lake, the boats, and the mountains around the water, the whole area feels much bigger and more open than the old town you head into afterward. And, after seeing the lake, I started noticing how much of the trip here was built around it. Whether you're walking through town, heading into the mountains, or stopping in the villages around Annecy, the water somehow keeps becoming part of the view again. Thiou Canal. From the lake, I headed straight into the old town following the Thiou Canal. The walk changes pretty quickly once you leave the open waterfront behind. Suddenly, you're walking between narrow streets, little bridges, and cafe terraces set right against the water, with old buildings packed tightly along the canals. The canal runs directly through the center of Annecy, and I ended up slowing down here way more than I planned. Every couple of minutes, there was another side street or bridge I wanted to look down from. This was also the point where the city started getting noticeably busier compared to the lake earlier in the morning. Even though this is one of the most visited parts of Annecy, it never became annoying to walk through because everything stays so compact and easy to explore on foot. If I did this walk again, I would wear shoes with better traction because the stone paths right next to the water get slick from the river mist. Insider tip. Instead of sticking strictly to the main canal path when it gets congested, look for the tiny archway leading into the Passage des Célestins. It cuts right behind the old buildings and lets you bypass the tightest bottlenecks completely. Palais du Île. Right in the middle of the canal, you'll eventually reach the Palais du Île, the small stone building sitting directly between the water channels. The structure dates back to the 12th century and has been used as a prison, courthouse, and administrative center over the years. Tickets to step inside cost about $4, but paying to see the interior exhibits is a waste of time on a short trip. I spent far more time walking around the outside than actually looking inside because the different bridges around the canal keep changing the angle of the view as you move through the old town. The thick iron bars on the lower windows still give you that heavy prison feel from the streets anyway. By this point, the lanes around the canal were fully awake. Restaurant terraces were filling up, market stalls were opening, and people were stopping every few steps to take photos around the water. Insider tip. The bridge directly in front of the building is always a chaotic mess of tourists fighting for photos. For a clean shot, walk to the Perrier Bridge just a short distance away, where the wider angle gives you a much better view of the entire structure. Afternoon. Louis Lachenal Promenade. After the crowded canal area, the Louis Lachenal Promenade felt noticeably quieter. The path follows the water through shaded sections lined with trees, and I liked having a stretch of the route where I could just keep walking for a while at a normal pace without constantly weaving through crowds. It's not a major landmark type stop, but I think that's exactly why it worked well here in the itinerary. This path is actually named after Louis Lachenal, a legendary local mountaineer who was one of the first humans to climb a peak over 8,000 meters or 2,600 feet back in 1950. After the busy canal streets, this part gave the day a more relaxed rhythm again before heading back into the center. Make sure to bring a light jacket along this section, because the heavy shade and the river breeze make the temperature dip unexpectedly. Annecy Market. I was lucky that one of my days in Annecy lined up with Market Day, because this ended up being one of the liveliest parts of the Old Town. If you're here on a Tuesday, Friday, or Sunday morning between 7 a.m. and 1 p.m., the market spreads through the streets and canal area with local cheese, cured meats, fresh bread, pastries, produce, and regional products from around Haute-Savoie. Some stalls near the main bridges definitely felt more tourist-focused and overpriced than others. I made the mistake of stopping at the first cheese vendor I saw, but I realized that if you wander a few blocks deeper into the side lanes like Rue Sainte-Claire, the prices drop and the quality gets significantly better. You can grab a warm slice of traditional Savoyard potato and cheese tart there for around $6. Overall, the market still felt genuinely local, especially once you get a little farther away from the busiest canal crossings. And if you're planning on trying Savoyard food later in this trip, this is also where you start recognizing a lot of heavy alpine ingredients and dishes that keep showing up on menus around Annecy. Lunch at Le Fritti. Trying a proper traditional alpine cheese dish was right at the top of my bucket list for Annecy, so I tracked down Le Fritti in the historic center. The inside of the restaurant smells intensely of melted raw milk cheese the second you step through the door, and the menu is dedicated entirely to local classics like fondue, raclette, and tartiflette. I went with the tartiflette, which comes out as a piping hot skillet of sliced potatoes, bacon lardon, and onions completely smothered under a thick, bubbling layer of reblochon cheese. It's incredibly rich and comforting, and you can expect to pay anywhere between $24 and $38 for a main dish here. Insider tip. Craving something sweet to cut through all that heavy cheese? Just a 1-minute walk down the block, I stumbled upon Glacier des Alpes on Rue Perrier, and it's easily the best ice cream in town. A scoop costs about $5, and even if the line looks completely massive, don't let that scare you off because it moves super fast. Plus, the staff always slaps a free mini tasting scoop of a completely random flavor right on top of your cone, which is how I ended up trying their wild blueberry. Late afternoon, climb to Annecy Castle. After conquering that massive cheese lunch, I braced myself for the steep hike up the hill to Annecy Castle. It's a bit of a calf burner, but it only takes about 5 minutes to reach the top from the Old Town lanes. Tickets to enter the 12th century fortress cost about $6, and while the small regional art and lake ecology museums inside are okay, they weren't the real highlight for me. The absolute best part of coming up here is the sweeping view from the courtyard. You're looking right down at a cluster of pastel rooftops, the canals slicing through the center, and the massive lake stretching straight out into the mountains. As the late afternoon sun starts to dip behind the peaks, the golden light hits the old stone walls, and the entire valley below just looks incredibly beautiful. It's the perfect place to just take a breath and soak in the classic alpine scenery before the sun completely goes down. Insider tip. Skip paying for the indoor museum ticket if you're tight on time or cash. You can actually walk right up to the castle gates and enjoy a fantastic panoramic view of the Old Town's historic rooftops entirely for free from the viewpoint just outside the walls. Evening, Lake Annecy activities and paragliding. I ended up walking back down to the waterfront to catch the final hours of daylight right out on the water. In the morning, the lake was quiet and peaceful, but toward the evening, it became the center of all the action in town. Even as the sun goes down, the shoreline stays packed with people renting pedal boats and small motorboats you can drive without a license. Renting a standard boat for an hour runs about $40, offering a great excuse to jump in the water before dinner. If you want the ultimate adrenaline rush, Annecy is actually one of the absolute premier paragliding spots in all of Europe. Tandem flights launch from Col de la Forclaz, a mountain pass overlooking the water, and they cost between $95 and $135. Floating thousands of feet in the air during the golden hour with the massive alpine peaks surrounding you is a wild contrast to just drifting around on a boat. Whether you want to keep things lazy on the water or go full thrill seeker in the sky, you can't really pick wrong to wrap up the day here. Dinner at Le Chalet. To wrap up my first day, I wanted to stay close to the water, so I snagged a table at Le Chalet right along the canal. The place has this classic alpine lodge interior packed with exposed wood and warm lighting. By the time I sat down, the dining room was loud, chaotic, and completely filled with the thick scent of melted cheese. Since I had already tried the tartiflette for lunch, I decided to go with their traditional Savoyard fondue, which they only serve if at least 2 people order it. It comes out as a massive communal pot of bubbling wine-infused local cheese with baskets of crusty bread for dipping. It's definitely a heavy meal, but after spending the entire day walking, it was the perfect way to finish the night. Expect to spend between $27 and $40 for a main alpine dish here. Insider tip. Because of its prime location right on the canal bank, this place gets aggressively crowded at 7 p.m. Don't just show up hoping to walk in. You absolutely need to call a day ahead to reserve an outdoor table right next to the water so you can watch the sunset over the canal while you eat. Day 2. Mountains and beaches. Morning. Le Semnoz hike. After spending the first day around the lake and Old Town, I wanted the second day to feel more outdoors focused, so I headed up Le Semnoz in the morning. It's one of the closest mountain areas to Annecy, and the drive takes about 20 minutes from the center. The road winds straight up through the dense pine forests, with the alpine views getting better after every single turn. Once you reach the top plateau, you're at an altitude of about 1,700 meters or 5,600 feet. The best part about this spot is that you don't have to commit to a brutal, exhausting climb to get the reward. The walking paths cut lazily across open mountain pastures, so you can just stroll between the viewpoints at your own pace. On a clear morning, you get an unbelievable panoramic view of the entire chain of the Alps, and you can even spot the snowy peak of Mont Blanc sitting out on the horizon. If hiking feels a bit too slow, the mountain is also famous for its downhill mountain biking trails during summer. Local shops back in town organize guided trips where they shuttle you and a full suspension bike straight to the summit, letting you ride a massive 16-kilometer or 10-mile descent all the way back down to the shores of Lake Annecy. The guided downhill trip usually costs around $85 to $100, and the forest trails are laid out so that even casual riders can handle the descent without wiping out. Insider tip. If you don't want to deal with driving the narrow mountain switchbacks yourself, the city actually runs a summer shuttle bus called the Ligne du Semnoz from the main Annecy station. It's completely free, runs regularly throughout July and August, and drops you off right at the summit plateau so you can save your energy for the trails. Afternoon. Lunch at Le Château. After spending the morning up in Le Semnoz, I stopped for lunch at Le Château before heading back down toward the lake. The restaurant sits right at the foot of the mountain slopes, which gives it a much more relaxed local ski chalet vibe. The menu leans into traditional regional cooking, featuring heavy mountain comfort food alongside classic grilled meats. I ordered a plate of their local Dio sausages cooked in white wine, which hit the spot perfectly after a cold morning hike. Main dishes here generally run between $18 and $30, which is a surprisingly fair price for being right at the mountain summit, sitting out on the terrace surrounded by open alpine pastures. Late afternoon. Annecy-le-Vieux Beach. After lunch, I headed back down the mountain to the lakeside, bypassing the crowded Old Town docks to check out Albany Beach in Annecy-le-Vieux. The whole scene here is miles away from the hectic energy of the city center. Instead of dodging tour groups and narrow stone bridges, I found locals stretched out across the massive lawns, swimming in impossibly clear water and paddling out on boards. I just threw myself down on the grass right by the shore and lost track of time looking across the water at the massive mountain peaks wrapping around the horizon. The lake bed itself is actually soft sand, and the water is famously clean and refreshing. If I could redo this afternoon, I would absolutely pack a towel and a swimsuit, because skipping a dip in that water was a massive mistake. Evening. Dinner at She Ingles. For dinner, I headed back into town to a spot called She Ingles, which turned out to be a fantastic break from the traditional cheese-heavy places I'd been hitting. The inside is styled like a chic, modern bistro, and the menu focuses on contemporary French dishes like fresh tuna tataki and pan-fried veal chops instead of endless pots of melted dairy. After 2 days of non-stop raclette and fondue, sitting down to a beautifully cooked piece of local Savoie trout with a lime cream sauce felt incredibly refreshing. Expect to spend between $26 and $42 for a main dish here, or about $45 if you go for their multi-course set menu. Insider tip: skip the main dining tables inside and ask to be seated in their hidden, winter garden-covered patio area out back. It has a much more intimate, relaxed atmosphere with hanging plants and softer acoustics, making it a great escape from the louder crowds near the front bar. Day 3. Villages around Lake Annecy. Morning, Menthon-Saint-Bernard. I wanted to change things up entirely for my third day and head out to explore the smaller villages scattered along the eastern shoreline. The first stop was Menthon-Saint-Bernard, which is only about a 20-minute drive from Annecy. The drive itself is beautiful, hugging an edge of the water the whole way and offering completely different angles of the mountains as you move down the coast. The village has a great laid-back energy. It centers around a quiet little harbor lined with rows of wooden piers where locals clear out their sailboats. The water here is unbelievably clear. You can see straight to the bottom where you can see rocks turn into soft sand. If you stroll down to the waterfront, you'll actually notice the tiny local beach and a great path that snakes along the shore, which is perfect for grabbing a quick pastry from the bakery up the road and just watching the small rental boats head out onto the water. Menthon-Saint-Bernard Castle. Even though I loved my first stop in the village, the main reason to come here was to see the Château de Menthon-Saint-Bernard. Driving up the steep, twisting road into the hillside, you spotted sharp stone turrets cutting right through the trees long before you reached the gates. The sheer scale of the fortress completely blew me away when I got out of the car. It feels massive, slightly intimidating, and heavy with history. When you get to the gate, an adult ticket to the tour inside costs $13, but to be completely honest, you can pass on it. Unless you're a die-hard fan of historical furniture, the inside rooms can feel a bit slow and restrictive since you have to stay with a guide. Instead, do what I wish I'd done from the start. Grab the grounds-only ticket for just $3. It saves you cash and lets you head out straight into the stone terraces, which is where the real magic of the property is anyway. Insider tip: walk past the main courtyard lines and head straight for the gravel paths that wind behind the timber-framed guardhouse toward the outer stone ramparts. It leads you to a completely wide-open, elevated vantage point where you can see the entire lake stretching down to the southern peaks. And you'll usually have the whole view to yourself. Afternoon, Talloires. After exploring the castle, I continued south down the coast to the second village on my list, Talloires. The town is tucked inside a deep horseshoe-shaped bay that completely blocks out the lake's choppy waters, creating a natural harbor where the water looks totally still. It's a beautiful upscale place that's been a famous retreat for centuries, dragging in historical figures and artists like Cézanne, who wanted total privacy. I spent about an hour simply walking through the narrow back paths before eating. The town is filled with old stone priories, centuries-old hotels, and hidden private doorways covered in greenery. I ended up wandering into the central historic lanes, checking out the old church, and walking down to the edge of the waterfront lawns to just stare out at the massive cliffs of the Roc de Cher Reserve directly across the water. It's a fantastic spot to explore on foot if you want a quieter afternoon that feels completely tucked away from the busier city tracks. Lunch at Le 1903. When it was time to eat, I wanted a spot that offered both a killer waterfront view and a high-quality culinary treat, which is exactly why I chose Le 1903. It's the bistronomic restaurant run by the multi-Michelin-starred chef Jean Sulpice, located right inside the iconic Auberge du Pierre Pisa estate. The setting is spectacular, sitting right at the edge of the water under giant shade trees. The meal itself felt lighter and incredibly refined. I had their local Arctic char, which was perfectly cooked with a delicate, crisp skin and paired with a bright carrot and ginger mint sabayon. They focus heavily on fresh lake fish and local Savoyard ingredients, but elevated to a whole different level. Now, Yes, it's definitely a pricey meal, but honestly, I didn't expect any less for a world-class lakeside estate run by a Michelin chef. You get exactly what you pay for here. A 2-course meal of either a starter and a main, or a main and a dessert will run you about $85, with the full 3-course set menu jumps to $95. Sitting right by the shoreline with a cold glass of local white wine was exactly the kind of experience I was looking for, and it definitely turned out to be the spot where you'll genuinely want to linger at the table long after the plates are cleared. Late afternoon, boat cruise on Lake Annecy. Right after finishing up at the restaurant, I walked down to Talloires Pier to catch the Navy bus. This is an omnibus ferry run by Compagnie des Bateaux that hits different ports around the water in a continuous loop. So I paid $23 right at the dock to just stay on the boat and use the whole ride as a scenic cruise. The route took me straight across the water, and the absolute highlight was drifting right past the Château de Menthon. It's a completely private 11th century castle sitting on a tiny, thin peninsula that juts way out into the lake. Because it's a private property, nobody can actually go inside, so seeing it from the water is the only way to get a look at it. Staring at this massive stone fortress rising out of the deep blue water with the alpine cliffs towering behind it gave me actual chills. The boat also swung past the Bay of Menthon-Saint-Bernard, giving me an awesome view from the water of the castle on the hill I'd just visited earlier in the day. Insider tip. Learn from my mistake of driving and dealing with brutal parking all day. I would do this completely differently next time by leaving the car in Annecy and buying a full-day Navibus ticket instead, using the ferry network as a stress-free hop-on, hop-off shuttle to explore all the lakeside castles and towns. Useful info for spending 3 days in Annecy. Best time to visit Annecy. For this itinerary, I'd probably avoid the peak summer unless you really want the busiest atmosphere possible around the lake. Annecy is most enjoyable when you can still comfortably move between the old town, beaches, lake activities, and mountain areas without everything feeling overcrowded by midday. Late spring and early autumn usually work best for that balance. The weather's still warm enough for boat rides, swimming, and outdoor restaurants, but the city feels less hectic than it does in July and August. Winter's a completely different experience. The lake and old town stay beautiful, but this trip becomes much less about water activities and much more about slower walks, mountain scenery, and seasonal events like the Venetian Carnival. City airport tips. I flew into Geneva Airport and drove to Annecy from there, which is one of the most common routes for international travelers. The drive usually takes around 45 minutes to an hour, depending on traffic around Geneva and the lake. One thing I liked is that the trip doesn't feel like a long airport transfer the whole time. Once you leave the busier Geneva area behind, the scenery starts shifting pretty quickly toward mountains, smaller towns, and lake views instead of highways and city traffic. Rental cars are easy to pick up directly at the airport, and prices usually start around $50 to $90 per day, depending on the season and type of car. If you don't want to drive, there are also shuttle buses and train connections between Geneva and Annecy. Shuttle tickets usually range between $20 and $35. Where to stay in Annecy? For a first visit, I'd stay somewhere between the Old Town and the lakefront. That part of Annecy works especially well because you can walk between the canals, restaurants, waterfront, and most evening spots without constantly thinking about transportation. Hotels around the center and lake usually range from around $140 to $300 per night, depending on the season and how close you stay to the water. Annecy-le-Vieux is a good option if you want something quieter and closer to the beaches, while Talloires works better if you want the trip to feel more focused on the lake villages and mountain scenery rather than the city itself. How to get around Annecy? Annecy itself is very easy to explore on foot. Most of the old town, canals, restaurants, and lakefront areas are all close together, so walking usually makes more sense than trying to use transportation inside the center. For the areas outside Annecy, like Semnoz, or some of the smaller villages around the lake, having a car can definitely be convenient and gives you the flexibility to stop along the shoreline whenever you want. But looking back, I honestly think I would have relied more on the lake boats for the villages instead. Since so much of the scenery is along the water anyway, taking the boat between places like Talloires or Menthon-Saint-Bernard would probably feel more relaxing than constantly driving around the lake roads between stops. Regional buses also connect many of the villages if you prefer not to drive at all. Where to eat in Annecy? Good food is pretty hard to avoid in Annecy, especially once you start wandering between the old town and the lake, but a few places stood out enough that I'd genuinely plan around them next time. Le Clos des Sons is the ultimate special occasion splurge for around the lake. It's a 3 Michelin-starred spot in Annecy-le-Vieux that does highly refined, hyper-local menus completely built around fresh lake fish, seasonal vegetables, and regional alpine herbs. This is a multi-course, slow-paced dining journey rather than a quick meal stop, but if you want one unforgettable luxury dinner in Annecy, this is where to book. Tasting menus run anywhere from $180 to $310 per person. For another incredible fine dining experience that feels a bit more modern, look at Vincent Favre Felix. Located in a historic abbey courtyard, the chef delivers creative, Michelin-starred Savoyard cooking with a contemporary edge. The local lake fish dishes like Arctic char are beautifully executed, and the artistic desserts are a major highlight. It's definitely an upscale environment, with multi-course tasting menus ranging from $105 to $190 per person. If you want a complete break from heavy multi-course menus and need a world-class caffeine fix, Café Bunna is the perfect spot. Tucked into a quiet corner of the old town, this is the smallest specialty espresso bar in Annecy. It doubles as a slow design concept store, so you can sip on a perfectly pulled cappuccino and grab a slice of homemade banana bread surrounded by locally made ceramics. Most coffee and pastry pairings here only cost $6 to $10 total, making it an amazing morning pit stop. The best part about Annecy for me wasn't one specific landmark or activity, it was how different each day ended up feeling from the one before. From the old town canals and mountain views to the smaller villages around the shoreline, this trip ended up being way more varied than I expected going into it. If this guide helped you plan your own Annecy trip, hit like and subscribe for more travel itineraries. And if Geneva's your next stop before heading home, check out my Geneva guide right here.